and that money is not wealth, but is a claim on wealth, and that grows exponentially through time, roughly 6% compounding. So what we've got in the world is an exponentially growing set of claims on real wealth, which ultimately comes from the natural capital of the planet. I did some calculations in 1992, and if you started with a cent in the year 1 and you grew it at 6% compounding, which is roughly what the money supply has been growing at for the last 300 years, you end up with a claim of that 1 cent growing to a claim on 100,000 galaxies of 1 billion stars, each the mass of our sun. It seems to me that the ecological crisis we have and the poverty and inequity in the world that we have is actually a direct consequence of an exponentially growing financial system. So I was just wondering, in your monetary and economic reform work, had you actually considered financial systems that were not growing exponentially in that fashion?
Well, the point I was trying to make was that we had an overbloated sector. I mean, you're absolutely right that we need to keep separate the finance as a means to an end, and you put it right. There are claims on real resources, and the lack of balance between the financial sector and the economic and the underlying economics was an important role, played an important role in this crisis. One of the ways of thinking about the situation that the United States and some other countries find themselves in today is that there are more claims on assets than we have assets. That's what you mean when you have somebody who owes more money than the value of the house. So the bank thinks it has a $500,000 piece of paper, but the value of the asset is only $300,000. And that's an example of a mismatch between a claim and an asset. Now, I also mentioned that the sad thing about this crisis and most crises is that most of the waste of resources occurs after the crisis, after the bubble breaks. While the bubble is occurring, resources are being misallocated. Money is going into constructing houses where it shouldn't be. Cheap money could have been used for dealing with global warming, could have been used for building factories, creating jobs, dealing with global poverty, lots of things, but it wasn't. It was wasted. And that was the financial sector's waste of resources. Okay? But most of the waste of resources occurs after the bubble breaks. And why is that? It's because of this problem of excess claims on resources. We can't sort out the claims, and in the midst of the inability to sort out claims, the system gets, in effect, paralyzed. And it's trying to get over that paralysis that economic policy has to be directed at. Now, one of the reasons it's so slow in getting over that is this point again I made. Nobody wants to face the reality. The banks don't want to admit that they're undercapitalized, because if they admit that if they write down those mortgages, they are undercapitalized. If they're undercapitalized, they have to get more capital. That means they're diluting shareholder value. They may be bankrupt. So all these nasty things. So what do? Well, they go to government and they say, allow us to keep on our books mortgages on properties that will never pay back as if they were going to be paid back. And in April of 2009, the U.S. Said, we allow you to have bad accounting. We officially, before that they did it unofficially, but now they're allowed to have bad accounting, to keep on their books these, what they call it, impaired mortgages as if they're good assets. Well, as long as that occurs, it's going to take a long time to get these claims back into reality, and that is going to slow down the process. I and others have proposed expedited bankruptcy proceedings or a restructuring, which would have been a way of dealing with this problem, of getting those claims back to reality. But not surprisingly, the banks opposed it very strongly, and it couldn't get through Congress.
Professor Stigler, my name is David Nelson from the University of Queensland. I'd like to take you back to the beauty pageant, if I may. At the moment, one of the reasons why Australia is doing relatively well in the world economy is our resources boom. But the resources boom, in turn, is keeping exchange rates up, which is not good for the other part of the economy. If you are an international student or a tourist in Australia, it's costing you 30% more to enjoy our hospitality than it did this time last year. If you are trying to export agricultural products or manufacturing products, you're 30% less competitive. So we have this sort of dichotomy in terms of the economy. And I'm wondering whether you would have any sort of comment to make on whether we ride with the resources boom for all it's worth, or whether we should be looking at trying to have a more evenly balanced economy.
Well, first let me say, as a visitor to Australia, I very much realize that your prices are high. Jokingly feel like every time I have a cup of coffee, I have to take out a mortgage. The point that you raise, more seriously, is a problem that economists have studied widely. It's called the natural resource curse. And it is why around the world, many rich countries have poor economies and poor people. The natural resources lead to an appreciation of the currency, and that leads to an imbalanced economy because it's hard for any other sector to do well, competing with imports or exporting any open economy in that kind of a context. And so economists have worried a great deal about how to deal with that problem. And the overall view, one thing is to do what you can to keep your exchange rate low. The other aspect of it is that natural resource prices are very volatile. And that means that since 2007, iron ore prices have doubled. And obviously that's been a big benefit to Australia, but who knows how long the steel boom in China is going to last, or some other material will come in to replace it. So that's why, in general, there's a strong view that one ought to make sure that a large fraction of that money is put aside in stabilization funds, much of which should be kept abroad. And that, by keeping it abroad, keeps it from leading to the appreciation of the currency. Much of it needs to be invested. Because the basic fact that one has to recognize is that as you take out resources from an economy, you're getting poorer. If you had the right accounting framework, if in a firm, accounting is important. Bad accounting led to the financial crisis, and bad accounting plays a big role in this natural resource phenomena. When you're taking out resources from an economy, you ought to have a subtraction from GDP. A firm that owned a resource and was selling it off would take off depletion or depreciation, and that would show up in its books as a depreciation or depletion. Well, you're selling off your assets, right? And you're selling off your assets. In many cases, you're selling them off at a very low price. In fact, if you don't have adequate taxes on mining, you're not getting, you're being cheated. And You know, and this happens, this problem of getting inadequate revenues from mines, from hydrocarbons, is a problem all over the world. It's a political economy problem. It's an economic problem. In developing countries, it happens all the time because the mining companies come in and the oil companies come in and basically bamboozle governments and threaten them, bribe them, do other things. Now, I assume that's not the case in Australia. But in advanced industrial countries like the United States, it's campaign contributions and it's all other kinds of threats of what might happen if you don't do it. When I was in the Clinton administration, we fought very hard. This is an issue I feel very intensely about because we fought some of these same issues. We fought very hard to make sure that rather than giving away our oil and our natural resources, our minerals, we had competitive, well-designed competitive auctions for them that make sure that the value of the rents went to the people. These are resources that I felt were the American people's resources, but we were effectively giving them away to the mining companies. To me, this was a no-brainer. But the result of this was that the mining companies were very effective in their campaign and succeeded in stopping this competitive auction. In the case of oil, we do have competitive auctions, but they're not well-designed competitive auctions, and deliberately so. And the difference, let me just draw, most countries have now recognized that another natural resource is the spectrum, the electromagnetic spectrum, which is used for cell phones and TV and that. And almost all countries around the world now auction off this the spectrum, and it's become a major source of revenue. And what they found out that by designing the spectrum auction well, and economists have made important contributions in this, by designing the auction well, they can increase the revenues a great deal. But they haven't done this in the area of natural resources. And this makes sure that the revenues that really rightfully belong to the people get to the people. So, and if you haven't done that, if you haven't done the auction, then you really need to have a mining tax as a way of ensuring that those resources get used, available for that belong to the people. Now, that then fits into this point the broader point that I was making. If you are taking resources out of a country and you're not reinvesting those resources in one way or another, a stabilization fund, human capital, infrastructure, then your economy is getting poorer, not richer. And a good accounting framework would show that.
This is really the last question, so make it special.
I want to take you a little bit back to your future comments when talking about world aggregate demand. And you said you didn't like the solution that American demand would be taken over by Chinese demand, because you didn't like the idea that the Chinese would become just as rich as the Americans.
Not just as rich, as profligate in their consumption pattern.
When you were talking about that, I was thinking, how on earth do you envisage stopping them? Because the one thing that I take from studying the Chinese economy is that their government is doing their very best to get to the consumption level of the Americans. The population expects that, and furthermore, the whole region expects that. And so I see no way on earth in which we or anybody else are going to stop them from doing that. And it's more the question how we're going to live with the fact that they will be just as rich as us.